So thank you all for joining us. This will not be long, but we did want to share some post-election realities that we are now going to be facing. And so I'm going to start really just by helping to set the scene. We all are familiar with the ancestor Fannie Lou Hamer, and we know that Fannie Lou Hamer said some pretty significant things throughout her life, the most important of which was that or at least for these purposes, that your freedom is shackled and chained to mine. And if I'm not free, you are not free either. Center for Law and Social Justice, family and friends, my name is Laurie Daniel Favors, and I am the Executive Director here at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. And now that the dust has settled a bit post-election, just wanted to share some thoughts with you that we have been exploring about our current state of affairs as Black people, and some thoughts about how we may need to structure our path forward in this new era. For the past year, I have been researching and educating about Project 2025. It is a massive conservative policy agenda that was written by a far right-wing coalition with the help of about 140 or so former Trump administration officials. And as we explained in our Center for Law and Social Justice Project 2025 Lunch and Learn webinar, which we had a few weeks ago, you can still see it on our YouTube page. The Project 2025 includes a 922-page plan that outlines the policy platforms in the president-elect's presidential transition project. Many of its principles are also found as a part of Agenda 47. You may have heard both of these terms used, and that is since been adopted as the Trump Republican platform. Now, make no mistake, we cannot predict anything, but if implemented as promised, the Project 2025 policies really threaten to erase most of the gains that our society has made since the height of the civil rights movement. And by that, I mean that it requires us to think about what it's going to look like to live in an America that has virtually no enforceable civil rights protections. Now, initially, when I say something like this to people, or at least in the days following the election, people will often proclaim, oh, don't you worry about it, we've been here before. You're worrying too much, you're being hyperbolic, we have been here before. And I would just suggest to you that is false. While our ancestors and even some of our remaining elders did indeed experience American life before integration and the protection of federal legislation like the Civil Rights Act, those of us who were born after Black people received full citizenship through those federal laws, those of us who are Gen X or younger, we have not. We have not actually seen this before. We do not yet know what it looks like to organize without the protections of the Civil Rights Act. We do not yet know how to navigate being in public spaces where we are not wanted simply due to our race without legal recourse. And we can't say with certainty which of the dangerous Project 2025 policies the next president will implement. So we think it's essential and it's very important to know what's in the plan so that our communities can prepare as best as possible. So when it comes to how Project 2025 could impact our communities, as we discussed in that webinar, Project 2025 actually has 4 key pillars. The first pillar is the policy platform itself. That was the document, the 922-page document that I'm sure many of you have heard about. And that document contains Pillar 1. It is a right-wing policy wish list. These policies include seeking to remake the entire federal government in some very significant ways. And those ways include, just looking at the text of the document, it includes ending social services as we know it, ending programs like SNAP, which is food stamps, for those of you who are familiar with the term, cutting the Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare, as many of you call it, dismantling federal agencies and slashing the budgets for agencies like the Department of Education, the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institute of Health, the Environmental Protection Agency, and others. Now, Project 2025 Pillar 1 also includes plans to cancel funding for programs like Head Start, child care programs, Title I programs, all of which provide services to low-income children. Now, we've discussed this extensively in our webinars and in our other communications, but now that we are in an era where the election has been decided, it's important that we are mindful of the era that we are in. And that's why we're doing this live today. According to the plan documents, Pillar 1, those 922 pages, schools that continue to provide programs that are designed in some way, shape, or form to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion, those schools and those programs would be prosecuted. They would face legal prosecution should there be any continued effort to teach about Black history, for example, to provide our children with a culturally responsive education. Those programs, should they be a part of the Department of Education, would essentially be cut, and those who are promulgating those programs would face prosecution. So this includes programs like My Brother's Keeper, My Sister's Keeper. It includes pipeline programs that are designed to build equity in our schools and to help disadvantaged New York City students learn. All of these programs are now at risk. And the funding that would be used to support diverse learners, after-school programs, teacher preparation programs are all now essentially on the chopping block in just a matter of weeks. I want us to think about what that means as we approach the summer. Now, we know that Project 2025 has a time frame, and that time frame includes ending a lot of these programs by the summer of 2025, which means we have to think about, if they do what they say they're going to do, what would it mean for our high school seniors to graduate high school, planning to perhaps go to college or a vocational tech training program, who would rely upon funding from the Department of Education, who would rely upon a FAFSA reform, who would rely upon a Pell Grant or guaranteed student loans. What will it mean for those high school seniors to graduate in June if the president-elect does what he says that they're going to do, and they cut those programs? How are our high school seniors going to navigate the summer with no education prospects ahead of them and no job skills that make them employable? We have to think about what it means if they truly do mean what they say, and they do cut food stamps, and they do cut free lunch programs and free breakfast programs. What is it going to mean for our kindergartners through 11th graders, our pre-K students, to finish out this school year without having access to the sorts of food supplementary programs that many of them have relied upon for years? What would it mean to have no summer youth employment funding? What would it mean for the funding that we rely upon in virtually every aspect of our community? What would it mean for those funding sources to be cut? These are things we have to consider, and that's just in the first pillar of Project 2025. This first pillar also includes the goal of dismantling the National Labor Relations Board and ending rights to overtime pay. So those of you who require or who rely on overtime need to be aware that these are programs that they have said in their documentation that they are seeking to cancel. Pillar 1 of Project 2025 also intends to reverse other key workplace protections that are provided by agencies like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And that's a commission, a part of an agency that investigates complaints of job discrimination. And unfortunately, cutting entitlement funding, the likes of which I've just described, and cutting federal agencies is just part of the Project 2025 or Agenda 47 program. There are 3 additional pillars to Project 2025 and Agenda 47, and they will present similarly challenging opportunities for us. And I have to phrase it as a challenging opportunity because I believe in being as optimistic as possible. But the 3 remaining pillars of Project 2025 will also contain some real challenges for us to grapple with. In the second pillar of Project 2025, there is the effort to create what's called a personnel database. Think of it like a LinkedIn, but only for conservatives, for some of the most extreme right-wing conservatives. And this database includes resumes and profiles for more than 50,000 Republican supporters who are preparing to fill tens of thousands of vacancies in the federal government. Now, you may be thinking, what vacancies are you talking about? I have not heard of any vacancies. What is this? Why do we have tens of thousands of people submitting resumes to a database to prepare them to be considered for tens of thousands of vacancies in the government that most of us have not heard about? That's because in Project 2025's second pillar, it also includes a plan to implement Schedule F. Schedule F is an executive order that President-elect Donald Trump has said he plans to sign, which would empower him to fire thousands of civil service employees, thousands of government employees who have not been deemed to be considerably or sufficiently in line with the Republican philosophy of governance. These new vacancies, if Schedule F is allowed to move forward, these new vacancies would be filled with the right-wing loyalist job seekers that are identified in this pillar, who have submitted their resumes to this database. The following pillar, Pillar 3, is focused on training. A lot of folks have said they've been in office before. When he was in office before, we had none of these things happen that you all say are going to happen. And that's a very good point. And one of the reasons many of the things that folks feared happening in the first Trump administration did not happen is because we have these angels of government called civil servants. And civil servants are people, employees in the government who work regardless of which administration is in office. These are lifetime, dedicated government employees, many of them disproportionately high numbers of them are people of African descent, Black people, because getting a job in the government has always been an access point for many of us who are seeking to enter and maintain our status in the middle and working class. These civil servants would be removed as a result of Schedule F, and the people that would be replacing them are actually right now preparing by being trained. It's a very comprehensive boot camp training program. You can go online and pull some of the training videos now. But these tens of thousands of future government employees who are preparing to fill future vacancies that will be created by the implementation of the Schedule F executive order, they are being trained so that if, again, we can only take them at their word, if the president-elect and his cabinet do what they say that they're going to do with Project 2025 and Agenda 47, they will ensure that those civil servants who were there in the first administration who said, no, what you're asking us to do is wrong. It's in violation of the Constitution. It exceeds our power. It exceeds our capacity, and it exceeds our scope of work. Those people who said no will no longer be there. And they will instead be replaced by, again, those tens of thousands of conservative right-wing Americans who have decided to submit their resumes to this database so that they can be considered to fill those positions. The reason they're being trained is so that we don't have opposition from within the federal government. Again, this is not something that we want to see happen. This is simply within the documents that they have said that they are seeking to implement. And these are challenges that we are now going to have to face as a people. However, that's only pillars 1, 2, and 3. The fourth pillar is the one that, quite frankly, gives me the most amount of concern. As you all may know, the fourth pillar raises a lot of cause for alarm, and it is because that fourth pillar contains details that we really haven't seen. What we know about it is that it does include a 180-day playbook, a 6-month playbook that would allow the rollout of all of those policy changes that I mentioned in Pillar 1 in 6 months. And what this means is that if successfully implemented, the conservatives who would now be taking on government would seek to erase the progress that we have made ever since the civil rights movement. And according to their 180-day playbook, they would be able to accomplish that if they do what they say they're going to do by the summer, July 19th of 2025, literally 1 month after Juneteenth. So now more than ever, we have to have a very clear-eyed understanding of where things lie and the very precarious nature of our new reality. However, this is not the first time that European American voters have decided to abandon attempts at a multiracial democracy. It's just not. And we need to know this history so that we can share it and rely upon it in the days to come. This is not the first time that protections for our communities have been discarded because of an embrace of racism and patriarchy. And for just a brief moment or two, I want to review that history because it appears we're about to repeat it. And not enough of us know it. So after the Civil War from 1865 until 1877, America went through its first effort at integration. This is right after the fall of the enslavement of African people. And this period, this first effort at integration was known as Reconstruction. A lot of you know that phrase. What we may not realize is that this was Integration 1.0. And during this integration period, American elected officials passed a number of laws to protect the 4 million recently freed and formerly enslaved Africans, and to protect the other free blacks who had not been enslaved, but who were still subjected to the same racial hierarchy as their enslaved brethren and sistren. And American lawmakers passed laws to protect those people, our ancestors, from the violence of the white Americans who sought to re-enslave them and who sought to bring back the racial hierarchy that fueled the enslavement of African people. Some of these laws included the 13th Amendment, which technically kind of sort of ended slavery. We can talk about the technicalities in another conversation. It included the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which technically gave black people access access to birthright citizenship and equal rights and due process under the laws. And they also passed the 15th Amendment, which prevents discrimination in elections. But in addition to those three constitutional amendments, they also passed the Civil Rights Act, remember that phrase, of 1866. They passed the Ku Klux Klan Acts in 1870 and 1871, and these were laws that essentially, the Civil Rights Act essentially said you can be as racist as you want to be, but you cannot exhibit that racism in public. You cannot use race as a way of disqualifying people from coming into your stores or from staying in your hotels or from riding on your trains. And those Ku Klux Klan Acts gave the federal government the ability to protect Black people from the racial terrorism campaigns that were sweeping the nation in the aftermath of the Civil War. And so relying on these protections in the first realm of integration, relying on these protections, formerly enslaved Black people, they organized. For Black people in this time, they were building towns, they were cooperating, they were designing education systems, they were opening stores, they were establishing communities, they were building financial institutions and structures that would allow them to navigate this new era, an era which for the first time, racism was not supposed to be a barrier. Anti-Blackness was not supposed to be a barrier to their success. They had the law on their side. They had lawmakers on their side. And this was a time when thousands of Black people also ran for office and they were elected as public servants. It was a very empowering, very brief period. Very brief period. And this was a time that America was attempting to reinvent itself from a slaveholding nation towards something that more represented a multiracial democracy. It was literally American Integration 1.0. However, as I mentioned, Reconstruction, Integration 1.0 started in 1865. And by 1876, the mood of the nation had changed. There was a presidential election and it was hotly contested. There were questions about the Electoral College and the count. And so because of this, white American power brokers who had by this point said, you know, we've done enough to help these formerly enslaved Black people. We've done enough to help these quote unquote Black Americans, because being a Black American was still a fairly new concept. And so white power brokers and elected officials in the aftermath of this contested election of 1876, those in the North and those in the South, they struck a deal. And they struck a deal that brought this brief period of integration to a very violent and very brutal and bloody end. And the Northern troops, the Union troops, were pulled out of the South, and Black people in that time were abandoned to the violence of white nationalist supremacist ideologies, racial terrorism groups, and white American enslavers who decided to take their country back and who decided to make America great again. And those newly elected Black officials, they were driven from their offices, their towns were raided, and the laws that were designed to protect Black people were reinterpreted by the Supreme Court. Sound familiar? And collectively, Black Americans were left to fend for themselves. Now, after Reconstruction ends by 1877, it wasn't until almost 100 years later, in 1964, when Black people were able to once again secure the protections of a second Civil Rights Act. A Civil Rights Act which currently is in law today, which essentially says, again, you can be as racist as you want to be. You can have as much anti-Black sentiment as you want, but you cannot stop Black people from coming into your stores simply because they're Black. You cannot refuse to rent homes or to allow Black people to stay in hotels simply because they're Black. You could not do those things because a new set of legislation had been passed. This is the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and that essentially, the decades in between the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the end of Reconstruction in the 1870s, that period was a period that is so severe. And when you study the history of this period, it is a period of a struggle that is so challenging. And yes, we had the Harlem Renaissance and we had these beautiful bursts of vibrance, and Black communities were still continuing to do the work of organizing and building and supporting each other. But this period was so devastatingly violent that it was called the nadir. And many said it was actually a period worse than enslavement. This is when we're seeing the growth and the explosion of convict leasing and other forms of oppression that we still feel the impact of on this day. So like our ancestors who witnessed the end of Reconstruction, I believe that we are now witnessing the end of this second integration effort, which started in the Civil Rights Movement. Project 2025 seeks to dismantle all of the advances that our ancestors and elders worked on to improve our status in this nation. And we are now poised to undergo a transition that our community is going to have to reckon with again for decades to come. And as the potential challenges that we are facing become clearer, it will be incumbent upon us to delve even more deeply into a spirit of service to each other and a spirit of mutual aid. And so now more than ever, we need all of us to consider how you can build community so that you can learn how to organize and to connect with those people who are actively working in our collective best interest. In this new era, which begins on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 2025, as we prepare to enter this new era, we're going to need to rely on each other like never before, which means our clubs, our civic groups, our D9 organizations, our faith-based institutions, our knitting clubs, our bowling leagues, our bidwiz tables, our spades tournaments, everywhere that we gather, we are going to have to do so while answering or centering rather the following questions. How do each of us use our gifts, our skills, and our talents to keep our communities safe? How do we prepare to provide ourselves with the resources that our communities need? And I have, since law school, been posing the following question, and usually it's laughed away, but I think it's a question that bears some grappling with in this moment. If we were to make a list of all of the resources that our communities rely upon in order to have our needs met, and we were to ask ourselves which of these resources are provided for our communities by people who are not a part of our communities. If the people who provide us those resources were in this new era to say, I'm no longer going to provide you those resources, how quickly could we provide them for ourselves? How quickly could we replicate the services that we all fundamentally rely upon that are not generated or provided for by us? How quickly could we replicate those services so that we can get to the business of meeting our own needs? These are not easy questions to answer. And for those of us who have only benefited from integration without actually having to have fought for it, this is a time period that, quite frankly, may induce a lot of shock. However, I and others that I am in community with are very comforted by the words of Marcus Garvey, who once said that when all else fails to organize the people, the conditions will. Now, I have some elders in my life who have said they quibble with that, and they think that when all else fails to organize the people, conditions might. And we are going to get an opportunity to answer that question in the days and weeks to come. We are now entering, as many of you have seen, the find out phase. And it is going to be significant. And our need to turn to each other and to build supportive communities, quite frankly, has never been greater in my lifetime. I'm Gen X. I know y'all may not think I'm a Gen X person, and I am in that age group. And I remember watching documentaries like Eyes on the Prize. I remember reading about a lot of what our ancestors went through when they were fighting for civil rights. I never imagined that we might have to be in a situation where we're fighting for those rights again. This is not the first time that white American voters have chosen to center racism and a racist distribution of resources in their effort to pursue their version of America. And as we are in this find out phase, our need to turn to each other and to build supportive communities, again, has never been greater. And so we just want to encourage all of us to really begin tapping into our collective power to protect and to strengthen our communities, because we do not believe we have yet begun to fight. But one of the things that we are crystal clear about is that if we do the work of figuring out how our individual purposes align with the needs of our community, and if we do the work of walking in those purposes with our back straight, and if we do the work of intentionally figuring out how to better collaborate and to engage with each other in the spirit of mutual aid and support, I believe that we can win. I believe our ancestors are on our side, and whomever you pray to is rooting for those of us who are on the right side of justice and history to win. We have not yet begun to fight. I'm looking forward to what the fight's going to look like, especially if I know that I can rely on those of us who are in our community doing the work of centering our community as the highest aim and centering our ability to meet our community's needs as our greatest goal. We're going to send out this message via our constant contact in the days and weeks to come. Please join our mailing list. We are going to continue to having weekly or every other or so week conversations about how we can better prepare, how we can grapple with what is to come. Our role here at the Center for Law and Social Justice, or I should say our vision at the Center for Law and Social Justice, is one which seeks or empowers our ability to build an educated and sophisticated Black electorate that is able to marshal the resources that we need in order for our communities to thrive. And while this new era is going to pose an unknowable amount of challenges, I'm confident that we're going to be able to do just that. Thank you so much. Please visit our website at clsj.org. Get on our mailing list. Lots more to come, lots of preparation and planning to do, and I'm confident that we'll be able to get it done if we do it together. Because like Fannie Lou Hamer says, your freedom is shackled and chained to mine. And if I'm not free, you're not free either. Thanks, everybody.